Good afternoon, and thank you for joining AIDR and the National Recovery and Resilience Agency for this webinar. My name is Amanda Leck, and I'm the Executive Director at the Australian Institute for Disaster Resilience. I'm pleased to host today's webinar event, From Risk to Resilience, Developing Australia's Second National Action Plan. This action plan will be an important step forward for implementing the National Disaster Risk Reduction Framework, and the NRRA are seeking to engage broadly to identify key actions that will drive the reduction of systemic disaster risk in Australia. I wish to start by acknowledging that I'm hosting this event from the lands of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation. I also acknowledge the traditional custodians of the various lands on which you will join us from today, the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people participating in this event. I pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging, and celebrate the diversity of Aboriginal peoples and their ongoing cultures and connections to the lands and waters across Australia. I will introduce our speakers shortly, but before I do, I would like to provide you with some brief housekeeping notes. We will be recording today's webinar and it will be available afterwards on the AIDR Knowledge Hub. Today, we will be using the Q&A feature on Zoom to take questions. So please post your questions in the Q&A box, not in the chat window. You will be able to upvote questions by clicking the thumbs up button on the screen where the questions are, and I will do my best to answer as many as I can after the presentations today. I encourage you to use the chat window to share any thoughts or reflections during the presentations, and just a reminder that you will need to select everyone in the drop-down menu for everyone attending today to view your messages. I would also like to remind you to be respectful to each other and our presenters when posting your comments and questions. But first, as we are getting started, we thought we'd like to do a little poll with our audience just to see where everyone's up to and to do a bit of a warm up with our audience. So over the past few years, since the development and release of the National Disaster Risk Reduction Framework, there has been an increasing focus in Australia on systemic disaster risk and disaster risk reduction. But in many ways, these concepts are still relatively new. So we'd like to hear from you. If you had to describe your thinking about systemic disaster risk, would you say, honestly, I don't really know what it's about yet? I'm beginning to develop an understanding. I'm well across the key concepts, or I have a very advanced understanding. If you could use the buttons to select where you fit within that, that landscape of your understanding of systemic disaster risk, I'll give everyone just a few moments, but it will also help the NRRA to understand people's thinking in this area and to be able to ensure that the work to develop the Second National Action Plan has a focus on ensuring people are up to date with this current thinking. I will also refer you to AIDR's Systemic Disaster Risk Handbook, which was launched last year on the International Day for Disaster Risk Reduction. It's freely available online, and my colleagues will drop a link into the chat if you haven't had a chance to read it yet. So just a couple more moments and then we will close the poll. So please vote now. It will certainly help us to frame the thinking around the development of this plan. So we have 367 people joining us online today, and I think we have nearly 670 people register. So some people will view this afterwards by way of the recording that is online. So I'll ask my colleagues to close the poll now, and we can just see where you are all sitting. Okay, so in terms of who's online, around 50% of you are saying, I'm beginning to have an understanding of some of these key concepts, and another nearly third are saying I'm well across the key concepts. So that's a very good start in relation to the development of this plan. I'd now like to introduce our speakers for today. Nico Padovan is the Chief Operating Officer and Deputy CEO of the newly established National Recovery and Resilience Agency in the Prime Minister's portfolio. He has a key leadership role ensuring the timely, effective, and a coordinated approach at a national level across all levels of government and with the not-for-profit sector, and assisting those impacted by a broad range of disasters, as well as ensuring they are better prepared to withstand future events. He has held senior leadership roles across the Australian government, and prior to joining the public service, he served in the military as an engineering officer for 16 years. Viv Johnson is the Executive Manager for Policies and Programs at the National Recovery and Resilience Agency, supporting the newly established agency to build cooperative relationships with all levels of government and the not-for-profit sector and private organisations to better prepare and support Australians impacted by disasters. Previously, Viv has held numerous roles in the Commonwealth Public Service across policy areas such as management of the federal budget and national programs in education and employment. Welcome, Nico and Viv, and over to you both.
Well, thank you very much, Amanda, for your introduction. And if I can thank also the many participants we have online today. It's terrific to see such a great turnout. Firstly, I'd like to acknowledge the great work being done by Amanda and the Australian Institute of Disaster Resilience team. Your stewardship of disaster resilience is critical to the government's agenda and sets a very sound foundation for the work that needs to be done as we move forward. Together with Amanda and the AIDR team, and also my colleague Viv Johnson, we're pleased to provide you today with a brief overview of the work we have started on developing the second National Action Plan and outline how you can get involved. Before we focus on the second National Action Plan, I wanted to spend a few minutes talking about the many Australian communities impacted by natural disasters in recent times. Whether it be bushfire, flood, storm, drought, earthquakes, tsunami, cyclone or other natural hazards, they can have significant impacts on exposed communities, the economy, the infrastructure and the environment. And the most recent floods, as we've seen in New South Wales and Queensland, are no exception. I wish to extend my sincere condolences to the families of those that tragically lost their lives in these floods, and also wish to acknowledge the hardship and disruption experienced by so many from this event. It could be seen as hollow when I say there are significant efforts underway towards building Australia's resilience to the impacts of natural hazards through disaster risk reduction. But to have so many of you here today is testament to the commitment and effort we're all making to reduce the impacts on individuals, businesses and communities when it comes to future disasters. With drivers such as changing climate, population growth, rapid urbanisation and infrastructure growth, new risks in many cases are occurring at a faster rate than existing risks are being reduced. People and the things they value will continue to remain at risk, and there remains great potential for harm. At the National Recovery and Resilience Agency, we acknowledge that the broader risk landscape is changing quickly. For example, through the work that we're doing with the Australian Climate Service, we can see that natural hazards will become more frequent and intense, that people, livelihoods and assets are more exposed and more vulnerable, that essential services are increasingly interdependent and hyperconnected, that disaster impacts are long-term and complex. And as we've seen with this most recent flood event in New South Wales and Queensland, the cost of each disaster often surpasses the previous record. The stability of natural, social and economic systems can no longer be taken for granted. And there is clear demand to address the growing impacts of a changing climate. Now, more than ever before, we need to sharpen our efforts on reducing the impacts of natural hazards on our communities and increase our understanding of disaster risks. Understanding disaster risk is more than just understanding hazards like fire, flood and heat, or the exposure of people, assets and critical infrastructure. Disasters arise when hazards intersect with vulnerable communities and when the consequences exceed the capacity of those communities to cope. Disasters happen when what we value and what we rely upon is disrupted or lost. We are more exposed and more vulnerable to disaster as social, technological and infrastructure systems become more connected. When one fails, the ripple effects travel right through the system. Reducing disaster risk is everyone's business. Disaster risks cannot be reduced by individual agencies or sectors on their own. We need a whole of society approach. While individuals and communities have important roles to play, they do not control all of the levers needed to reduce disaster risk. Government and industry must take coordinated action to find practical and tangible ways to reduce disaster risks within their control, to limit the creation of new risks and disasters experienced by communities. Before we continue, I'm conscious that not all of you will be familiar with the National Recovery and Resilience Agency and the work that we do. As a new agency that was formally established on the 5th of May 2021 and came into full effect on the 1st of July last year, I'd like to provide a brief overview of who we are, what we do, and what our role is in relation to disaster risk reduction. The National Recovery and Resilience Agency was established in direct response to a key recommendation from the Royal Commission into National Natural Disaster Arrangements. The NRRA, as it is known, provides national leadership and strategic coordination for disaster recovery, resilience, risk reduction, and preparedness for future disasters across all levels of government and with the many parties involved external to government. We know that Australia is susceptible to natural hazards as demonstrated by recent events. We also know we can never flood, cyclone, drought, or fireproof the nation, but that we can be better prepared nationally for any scale of event and any source of disruption. We therefore play a critical role in ensuring that individuals, businesses, and communities are prepared for future impacts from disasters, and that the agency works closely with the local and state governments and communities to support them in being more resilient and better prepared for future disasters. Carriage of the National Disaster Risk Reduction Framework was transferred to the agency, along with the recovery functions from Emergency Management Australia. It was combined with the previous National Bushfire Recovery Agency and the National Drought and North Queensland Flood Response and Recovery Agency. When it comes to the framework, I think it's also important to mention that we're continuing to build on the national leadership demonstrated and the great work accomplished through the former National Resilience Task Force. Also shown on the map there is the footprint of our recovery support officers. And for those who want further details, I encourage you to click through on our website where you can find the individual names and contact details for each of our recovery support officers. Through the Recovery Support Officer Network, we work very closely with local communities across the country. Our recovery support officers have been recruited from within communities and provide an Australia-wide on-the-ground presence supporting recovery and risk reduction initiatives, and are also key to informing policy development and program design. There are currently 40 recovery support officers nationally, and we're in the process of doubling that number. Many of the recovery support officers have worked closely with councils, local disaster management groups, both during and after disaster events. As I mentioned earlier, for those of you that would like further details, all the contact arrangements for our recovery support officers are listed on our website. I'll now hand over to Viv Johnson, Executive Manager of Policy and Programs at the agency, to talk through development of the second National Action Plan and how you can best get involved. Thank you.
So thanks, Nico. I'm sure you're all aware that the National Disaster Risk Reduction Framework that was publicly released in April 2019 was later endorsed by the Council of Australian Governments in 2020. It was designed to enable better understanding of disaster risks, improve resilience, and bolster the capability and capacity of communities to withstand natural hazards. The framework established a strategic foundation for reform, taking a whole of society, systems, and values-based approach towards risk-informed, sustainable development. And the framework's central premise was really that by changing how we think about disasters and working together, we can take action to be better prepared and more resilient for whatever comes our way. It is targeted to sector and policy leaders and provides a strategic framework for systemic risk reduction efforts that may be delivered within the public and private sectors. This includes work in many areas, including land use planning, infrastructure, resilience investment, emergency management, social policy, agriculture, education, community development, energy, and the environment. It sets out foundational work needed to reduce existing risk, while also preventing new risk being created and making sure that facilitating information is available to all who need it to take action. The framework outlined a national and comprehensive approach to proactively reducing disaster risk for now and into the future through the development of new disaster risk and resilience strategies, policy goals, capabilities and competencies across all sectors. Reducing Australia's disaster risk is one of the critical components to enable resilience, and therefore the framework is a cornerstone of our work at the NRRA. The framework also aligns to the Sendai Framework for Disaster Risk Reduction 2015 to 2030, which was adopted by Australia and other members of the United Nations. And through this Sendai framework, countries around the world recognise the importance of not only managing disasters, but managing disaster risk. Sendai recognises its high level of interconnectivity and interdependency to the Paris Agreement and the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. I'll just mention quickly that we're also coordinating Australia's midterm review against Sendai with Australia's report due in September, and where possible, we will be lining up the consultations on the midterm review and the second National Action Plan. The priority areas of the framework are currently driven through the first National Action Plan, which was released in December 2020 and outlines a range of initiatives that were already underway, consolidating efforts from Commonwealth, state and territory jurisdictions. Recent input from external stakeholders provided reflection on the first NAP and identified that the second National Action Plan should really progress into a more strategic, inclusive and forward-looking plan, which will drive cultural, behavioural and procedural change. Importantly, it needs to be action-oriented. That is, we intend to put the action back into the action plan. The Royal Commission International Natural Disaster Arrangements also recognise that more could be done in the NAP to guide national whole-of-society efforts to proactively reduce disaster risk. The second National Action Plan is envisaged to be a 2-year plan to line up with the review of the framework itself in 2023 and should provide the vehicle to detail the collective actions and partnerships needed to enable nationally significant initiatives to be delivered across business, community and government. Also, the investment needed in priorities that build place-based and national resilience and reduce risk for the long term. And finally, also outline the roadmap for how all parties are going to get there. NRRA is uniquely placed to provide national leadership and convening authority to bring stakeholders together to create the National Action Plan that will focus national effort to reduce disaster risk for the long term and ensure Australia is better prepared for future events. However, we acknowledge that the development of the second National Action Plan is just the start. And importantly, it will be the action that flows from it through which we hope to see a reduction in harm, the prevention of the creation of new disaster risk, and better mitigation of existing risk. As noted, we cannot do this alone. Key to change is partnering with those who can affect change and also ensuring the necessary knowledge and expertise is leveraged to support decision making. We are committed to working with you to implement tangible changes in the disaster risk reduction sector. Just as the framework highlights the interdependencies of different sectors for change to be enduring, there will also need to be actions for all levels of government, the private sector, individuals, community, research sectors, and more. We all have a role to play. Next slide, please, Charlotte. So today we're asking for you to get involved. We invite you to share your experience and expertise. There have been a few discussions already with small groups of stakeholders, and thank you to those who have been able to participate. There will be a range of consultation mechanisms, but at a high level, there are several ways you can get involved in the co-design process. We will be launching a discussion paper for consultation, and we'll be seeking written submissions from all sectors. This will be launched on the 26th of April via the AIDR and NRRA websites, and with submissions due back by the 27th of May. At the same time, we'll also be running a short survey, and this will also help feed into the Sendai midterm review process, and we strongly encourage you to participate. For those online in state and local governments. We'll also be reaching out via some of our existing governance forums that are already in place, like the Australia-New Zealand Emergency Management Committee. We will also look to hold some deep dives with specific sectors. For example, we're looking to hold a charities and community roundtable to bring together the sector mid-year. We'll also be holding a Risk to Resilience Summit on the 29th to the 30th of June in Sydney for approximately 300 delegates, and details for the summit are currently being settled. We're looking to issue invites shortly. Next slide, please, Charlotte. As mentioned, I really encourage you to please get involved and contact the NAP team at nationalactionplan.recovery.gov.au, and please keep an eye on the NRRA website, where we will have regular updates, as well as through AIDR. We encourage you to take part in the process and put your views forward, and we really look forward to working with you. Thanks, Amanda. Back to you.
Thanks very much, Viv. Now you've heard from Nico and Viv as part of their presentation, and they've outlined a number of ways that people can get involved. And I'm pleased to note we have 422 people online, so I would suggest there's a lot of people very interested in the development of this plan. So I think we're off to a great start. I'm interested now to turn to the audience again for another quick poll. And this time, what do you think are the most important characteristics or elements for you in the National Action Plan? A few choices here. Should it be bold and inspiring with some lead actions? Should it clearly articulate guidance on how to take action? Should it highlight a capstone agenda to align for your own local work and priorities and support strategy development, policy making and engagement at a level of influence? Should it enable collaboration and connection across sectors and levels? Should it have priorities for planning and investment nationally at all levels linked to common outcomes? Should it unearth and build on all the good work and knowledge that's being done across this broad sector? And should it be a unified narrative that disaster risk reduction is everyone's business? So please vote now. Have your say. There'll be many opportunities, as Viv has outlined, for people to get involved by surveys, by responding to the discussion paper. We have an event coming up this Thursday in Sydney with a number of people to run a workshop. We've already had some online consultations, and then of course there's the Risk to Resilience Summit. So lots of ways to get involved, and AIDR and the NRRA encourage that involvement and participation. We'll soon move to your questions, so if you could vote now, I'll leave it open a couple more moments, and I'll ask my team if they could please close the poll, and we'll have a look at those results and see what people think. Okay, 59% clearly articulated guidance on how to take action. So I think that's a clear message there. A third of people, a capstone agenda to align plans and efforts. And then another strong group with bold and inspiring lead actions. Common national priorities for investment, and that's certainly what we heard on the online consultations early. People from a whole variety of sectors wanted to know what the priorities were and how they could get behind those priorities with regard to their own programs of work and their own investments in this area. So I think there's some really good intelligence coming through in this poll, and I thank you for that. Okay, well, I think we'll now move on to the next section, and I'm hoping we can bring Nico and Viv back onto the screen with me. We have around about 35 minutes for some Q&A. And so this is your opportunity. We already have 7 questions in the Q&A. I can't promise I will get to all of them, but we will do our best to get through as many as we can, Nico and Viv. So I might go first to you, Nico. The National Recovery and Resilience Agency has an important role in recovery and risk reduction. Can you tell us a little bit about why you were involved in this space?
Thanks very much, Amanda. And I think, as you touched on with the introduction, I've previously had exposure to dealing with disasters through roles I held in Centrelink, the military, and and also the former Department of Climate Change. But it really wasn't until I joined the task force that was set up in 2019 to deal with the North Queensland floods that I really got to see firsthand, you know, the scale and size of devastation associated with a major disaster event. But also, I think importantly, and for the purpose of this discussion, you know, where the opportunities exist to better prepare for future disasters. So for me, you know, at a personal level, you know, the work of this agency resonates very strongly, and hence the reason I'm still here and still very keen.
Thanks, Nico. And over to you, Viv.
Oh, thanks, Amanda. I think, you know, I really appreciate the importance of the recovery and resilience and agenda, and what resonates with me is the ability to bring together all the sectors of the community, health, infrastructure, employment, and all levels of government, NGOs, and research. And I really do enjoy working in an area as diverse as this. But importantly for me, it's really that what we do makes a difference to people every day. Personally, I know the importance of the system working well. In the 1920 bushfires, my family home was affected. We were fortunate. We had a lot of early warning, and I think collectively the country also did have a little bit of an early warning. So as early as sort of September, October, we'd known that the season that was forthcoming was going to be quite intense. So we'd had the opportunity to prepare as a family to do all the things that you're meant to do, you know, around your property to get ready. And then again, when things started getting really intense, we were probably watching about 3 different bushfire fronts heading our way for almost a month. When surprisingly a 4th one hit us, which was unexpected. So we experienced a 95% burn scar on our place, and we were just really fortunate that the house was saved. Some really amazing people went in. We evacuated just before everything got very difficult. And some amazing people went back in after us, and certainly you could see the damage, you know, just 2 meters from the kitchen door. So they did an amazing job saving our place. So I guess we've also experienced personally that recovery is a really long journey. And also after bushfire, you have the additional effects of rain, and as we'll all appreciate, the last couple of years there's been a lot of it, and the ensuing sort of damage that can cause as well. So importantly, I guess I also acknowledge that every person's experience you know, in going through a natural disaster is really different, and recovery for every individual and every community is also really different. So I guess I'm pretty committed to the policy agenda. I'm strongly believe it needs to be ambitious. It needs to drive immediate change within short timeframes, while also recognising and acknowledging that some parts of the system will take much longer to change. But really hope that I'm here for the journey.
Thanks very much, Viv. And one more question from me. Keep those questions coming into the Q&A from our audience, and there's already some great questions emerging. But one more question from me. What are you both hoping to get out of consulting with stakeholders through this process? And first, over to you, Nico.
Well, I think in part, Amanda, we've already answered that question. So it was terrific to see the focus and recognition of the importance of collaboration. You know, no one party has the skills, the capacity, the capability to do what is required here. So for us to be able to, you know, to engage well with the broader, you know, the community and have representation from all sectors is absolutely key. And I think to be able to harness the collective efforts, and today is a great step towards that, you know, to harness those collective efforts so that we are working towards a common agenda and a common set of outcomes.
And Viv?
Yeah, I think I'd just add to Nico's comments that the thing for me that's really important is that prioritisation. Collectively, we can all do our part, and I think it's really important for each sector, each group, and individuals to appreciate what their priorities are in driving the change. So that's what I'm hoping that we get out of this.
Okay, well, look, I'm going to turn to our audience questions to get through as many of those as I can in the next 25 minutes or so. So we know that a number of, state and territories have their own resilience strategies. There is a new resilience agency in New South Wales, for example. So how will links be established between the national plan and those state plans? So, for example, the Queensland Resilience Strategy, but New South Wales is also developing one. And how will it address the enormous diversity in communities and issues that are being faced by communities across Australia? Would you like to have a go at that, Nico?
Very, very happy to start, and acknowledging Amanda, we don't have the answers here, but I mean, some observations I might make in that context. So firstly, we're starting from a very good space in that one of the key areas of focus when we first established this agency was to establish, to put in place those effective working relationships with the Queensland Reconstruction Authority, Resilience New South Wales, Bushfire Recovery Victoria and others. I think it's important to note at a national level, though, we are dealing with some quite different levels of capability and capacity when we look at the states, but also when we go down to, the 537 local governments that we deal with, just recognising that, that there is no one size fits all solution. So, part of this is top down, and we do not want to reinvent history here. If there are plans, if there is thinking that has been done, we would look to leverage that and harness that to the extent that we can. But there's also a role here in terms of the bottom-up type activities such as this forum, the work that we do on the ground with our recovery officers, to make sure that what we develop is fit for purpose at a local level. Because I'm very conscious sitting here in Canberra, it can all be very academic at times, but having that connection right through to the coalface, I think is going to be key.
And Viv?
Thanks, Amanda. I think absolutely, as Nico suggested, we certainly don't want to reinvent the wheel, and we appreciate there is a lot of amazing work that's already taken place, and that key organisations, as identified, particularly the recovery and resilience agencies in each jurisdiction, do have plans that guide their work. So the approach would definitely be about taking all of that into account. What we would hope is that what we're identifying is the benefits from each of those plans, also take the learnings and leverage the better practice for everyone, being able to sort of synthesize that up into a national action plan, which also provides the clarity around roles and responsibilities for all sectors.
Thanks, Viv. So there's a few questions coming through about who's going to be involved in the development of the plan, but one in particular stands out for me, and that's how do we, someone's very interested to know how we can embed that lived experience that, you've both spoken to into the governance of the next national action plan. So we've had, many, many communities impacted by disaster. Will that lived experience be able to come through in the development of the plan?
So I think, Amanda, we can definitely reassure everyone that we are keen to make sure that everyone has a voice in consulting on the second National Action Plan. We have, as identified, multiple sort of channels for seeking input, and we'll certainly be also looking at including as many peak bodies as possible at the summit and in our consultation. But for individuals and local communities, we really encourage them to put in a submission to the discussion paper. And there's always the opportunity, as Nico identified, we have an extensive recovery support officer network across the country, and really keen for them to be available to reach out to others and get input through that mechanism as well.
Thanks, Viv. I might go to the next question. So there was a first National Action Plan. You spoke to that as part of your presentations. So what are the key learnings from that process that will inform the development of this second plan?
So I think there are a couple of key learnings from the first National Action Plan under the framework, and I think I sort of identified a little bit of that in the introduction. And one was really that that National Action Plan it was an important first step, but it really did just map a range of activities and brought those activities together to be consistent with the framework into that single sort of picture. It was I guess a critical step in recognising that reducing disaster risk is beyond the responsibility and remit of just the emergency management sector. But I think we acknowledge that the first National Action Plan was developed before some other key events, and one critical one was before the Royal Commission International Natural Disaster Arrangements was finalised. And I think the information and the direction that the Royal Commission has set really is pointing us in a direction where we're pretty clear that the second National Action Plan needs to really guide a really whole of society efforts to proactively reduce disaster risk and really be that strategic forward-looking document, but with a really strong focus on resilience and everyone's roles and responsibilities. What else have we learnt from that first National Action Plan? We have a strategic monitoring and evaluation framework that has been developed for the national framework, and it will collect data about the work that's being undertaken to reduce disaster risk across Australia. And importantly, the outcomes of that work. And for us, the MEL framework is pretty critical to ensure that we're facilitating that continuous improvement of the collective national effort, so that we understand systemic change, what's needed, and what particularly is needed to prevent new and reduced existing disaster risk. I might
Thanks,
just
Viv.
pause there.
Yeah, no, that's good. And look, you've segued into another sector that I'd just like to touch on. So you spoke about the National Strategy for Disaster Resilience and this notion of shared responsibility. And one of the critical sectors that will need to be involved is the business community. So how will you include one of Australia's most vulnerable and sometimes overlooked stakeholder groups, and that is those who run small and medium-sized businesses across Australia, and how will we make sure that group can be involved in the development of this plan?
So again, Amanda, I think our approach will be to encourage any individual small business to have a voice and provide a submission to the discussion paper. We'll also be working with key peak bodies such as BCA to seek input. We also can reach out to the Small Business Ombudsman and make sure that input is received from that area as well. But we absolutely appreciate that small business does have a critical part to play in ensuring that we get the settings right for reducing disaster risk in the future. So very keen to listen.
Great. Nico, did you want to respond, or will we go on to the next question?
Well, I might just make the point, Amanda, just further to what Vivian's been saying, is that on the disaster recovery side, I mean, small business is an area that we saw as being undercooked in terms of what was available. So you will have seen over the last couple of years quite a focus around supporting small business through the recovery process, through things like the small business grants. To Vivian's point, we have been working closely with the Australian Small Business and Family Enterprise Ombudsman to make sure that there is a voice for small business in the work that we do. And I think, just from lived experience, the work that we do, particularly in rural and regional Australia, it's small business that is often the glue that holds a lot of these regional communities together. So we do recognise it goes beyond, the impact of these disasters goes beyond the business itself, and is actually fundamental to the cohesiveness of some of these communities.
Thank you. So look, the next question I'm going to go to is one around coordination. So I'm sure NRRA, certainly AIDR, we see a lot of great work going on across the country to reduce disaster risk and support resilience, but it's often somewhat uncoordinated. So how do you see that the National Action Plan will be able to sort of get ahead of the great work that's happening across the country, and a reflection that, all levels of government and the business community have already reflected in the early consultations that they're looking for, if you like, that mandate for change. So how do you see the National Action Plan being a catalyst for us to sort of move forward in a more coordinated way?
I might begin on that one, Amanda. I think the action plan of itself is that guiding light. I mean, at the end of the day, the conversations, the relationships, the networks that are formed through activities such as this, the Risk to Resilience Summit, and the many other initiatives that are underway at the moment are absolutely key. And I think they have something like the National Action Plan that provides that at least high level direction of what it is that we're aiming towards, so that we've got consistency of approach. Because when you look collectively across Commonwealth government, state government, local government, and then the many parties external to government, whether they be peak bodies, whether they be local groups. I mean, there's a tremendous amount of capacity there, and so having a national action plan that helps guide that work collectively, I see as absolutely key, but it has to be underpinned by relationships and networks.
And Viv, did you want to respond?
Oh, I think Nico's answered the question, Amanda.
Great, no worries. Okay, look, there's many questions coming through around, ensuring diverse voice, First Nations voices, voices of young people. So I think rather than go to each of those questions, I think you have spoken about opportunities to become involved through things like responding to the discussion paper and so on. But I think what we're hearing from those online is, a real desire for an inclusive process that brings in all voices. Would either of you like to say anything further on that, or will we sort of move on to the next kind of thematic area?
Well, perhaps, Amanda, if I can give an assurance, there is no predetermined outcome that we're working to here. We are genuinely interested in what, people have to say. So we are looking for that input. We value that input, and at this stage, we are consulting far and wide to make sure that where we land with this plan well represents the broader community.
Thanks, Nico. Okay, we have a question around local government, and we have a lot of people from local government online, and it's in two parts. So local government does have a critical role around working directly with the communities that they serve, and have a critical role in capacity building as well, and taking those mitigation actions and putting them online. Do you think the NRRA will support a standard approach developed in close consultation with communities, so that we can sort of build capacity collectively? We're not all reinventing the wheel and starting from scratch, and a lot of the knowledge that is known by a few, is known by more. Would you like to just reflect on the role of local government a bit?
Once again, Amanda, I might just begin on that. I mean, one of the big learnings for us in response to the North Queensland flood event, and then subsequently with drought, with bushfire, and now more recently events such as the floods in New South Wales and Queensland, is local government is absolutely key. So in the case of the North Queensland floods, where we first started, we did set up a direct engagement with those 14 local governments. We had a member of the local government sit on the advisory board of this agency. We've worked closely with ALGA and others in the local government other local government associations at a state level. So, local government we do see as absolutely key, but we also know with the 537 local governments around Australia, no two are the same. And so this goes back to that model that says, whatever we develop, at a national level has to be fit for purpose at that local level. So what works in Berkshire has to work in East Gippsland, has to work with Brisbane City Council. And when you look at that huge continuum that you have when it comes to local government in terms of capacity, capability, resourcing, and so forth, that is a challenge that we're certainly well aware of, but one we don't shy away from. So local government for us has a very important role to play. A lot of the focus to date, from having travelled around the country and met with many local governments, been a lot of very good work done on the response and recovery side of things. Some local governments, particularly some that I've worked with directly in Queensland, and also places like Tasmania, have done some great work around risk reduction and resilience, and we're looking to ideally share those learnings at a national level.
Thank you, Nico. And Viv, did you want to reflect on local government at all?
So I think, as Nico said, we have a really close working relationship with ALGA, and through a number of different mechanisms, including ALGA's representation on the National Emergency Management Ministers meeting. But we are absolutely conscious that tailoring the unique circumstances of each local government organisation are critical to success, but also conscious that I think, as you alluded to, Amanda, there is a lot of amazing effort going into this space, and one of our key roles, and one of the advantages of having the NRRA now as an enduring agency, is to try to bring all of that expertise, that learning together, and ensure that we can share it more broadly, and certainly lift the capability and capacity of all local government areas in a more consistent way. So that's certainly something that we would be hoping to achieve.
Thanks, Viv. And I might just reflect as well that local government representatives are key users of all of the AIDR handbooks and guidance documents, and local government are a key group for us in terms of building that capability nationally. So anyone from local government online, I encourage you to check out the Knowledge Hub and all the wonderful resources that are freely available to you that are funded through the NRRA. There's a lot there that you can build on. I'm going to go to a question around land use planning, because it is a key area to reduce disaster risk. So do you think that this plan will identify mechanisms to help leverage land use planning outcomes, such as things as moving urban settlements out of risk zones? Do you think the plan will look to that as a key strategy?
Look, I think Amanda, given some of the commentary in the public domain in recent times, including from our Coordinator General, the issue of land use planning is something we can't ignore. So when it comes to the future modelling work that we've done with the Australian Climate Service that I referred to earlier, we have a much better sense moving forward of the increasing frequency, severity, and likely location of disasters. And I think the more we can share that type of information, the better informed some of these decisions can be. And I think land use planning is one where we absolutely have to factor in, what the scenarios are looking forwards rather than backwards, and is part of the conversation that will be had with the states in terms of the way in which assistance and support is provided by the Commonwealth moving forward. So I think land use planning is absolutely part of the conversation. As to where it lands, that's ultimately going to be a decision of government, but one that we do want to at least have on the table.
Okay, there's a few questions about what I would call grassroots. So do you think there is scope to ensure organisations at that local community level are funded to participate in both the development of the action plan and its implementation?
So in terms of consultation on the plan, there isn't funding available to support community organisations to provide input. We would hope that everyone thinks it's important enough to make that contribution, noting the shared risk, for actual delivery actually exists across all of us. As we've sort of mentioned a few times, we all have roles and we all have responsibilities in this space. In terms of implementation, once the second National Action Plan is finalised and agreed by government, I guess if there are national initiatives that require support and funding to be implemented, that will be a decision for government probably later this year.
Thank you.
Perhaps, Amanda, if I could add to that, it's worth just keeping an eye to the very substantial funding that is already available for disaster risk reduction, whether it be through the Emergency Response Fund, whether it be through the Disaster Risk Reduction Program itself, or also the Preparing Australia program. So I think there are already a number of vehicles. We are talking several $100 million that will be available, to leverage as we settle this plan. So we would be looking for alignment, whether it be the PAP National, the Preparing Australia National program, or future iterations of the Disaster Risk Reduction program. But we would absolutely be looking at leveraging those to implement elements of this plan.
Thanks very much. So this is really around investment in risk reduction. So we know that, at the moment, the figures that are bandied around are 97% of, funding is going to recovery and 3% to rebuilding. I'm not quite sure how you would answer this, but, over what period of time does the NRRA think that can be sort of turned around? You spoke about, this is the first standing Commonwealth agency for resilience and recovery. And if we're going to turn around this equation, you know, what sort of time frame are we talking about? You know, 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, where we get more investment upfront in risk reduction and resilience building, and therefore, you know, less need for the recovery piece.
Well, I think the important thing, Amanda, is those figures date back to the Productivity Commission report of 2014, as you're probably aware.
Mm-hmm.
We are looking to update those figures. I mean, what we are already seeing anecdotally is the ship is definitely turning, and one of the things we're conscious of is that, you know, the resilience and risk reduction is not a standalone activity. So even through initiatives like the disaster recovery funding arrangements, have a component built in around betterment and building back better. So, you know, by making that, you know, resilience and risk reduction an integral component of the broader set of work that we're responsible for, we're already starting to see that shift. So I would hope when we do the next of the studies to determine what that apportionment looks like, that we will already have seen quite a shift just over the last couple of years.
I'm very encouraged, Nico, when I hear you saying the ship is turning around, and again, we see a lot of activity that we would hope is making that difference. Did you want to respond to that at all, Viv?
No, that's fine, Amanda.
Okay, well, look, I'm going to go to the last question because we are running out of time, but needless to say, there's been terrific engagement online, more than 48 questions. I've done my best to put questions together and ask as many as I can from you both. But I'd like you to both now just reflect on, what does success look like for the NRRA within, if you like, this horizon of developing the second National Action Plan and starting to implement it. So what does success look like for you first, Nico?
Success for me looks like, you know, one of the measures would be around the extent to which all parties felt engaged in the process. So the plan itself is the outcome, but how we get there, the level of engagement I see is absolutely key, because there has to be ownership. It's a shared responsibility, and it's one we have to work on collectively. So, you know, that sense of, you know, being effectively engaged through the process, to me, is a key measure of success. Thanks,
Nico. And to you, Viv?
Yeah, I think building on Nico's comment, it's so not just in the consultation and collaboration in developing that second National Action Plan, but also that we all understand the role that we have to play in implementation, and that the second National Action Plan provides a level of clarity for all of us on our roles and responsibilities, but also the priorities, both short, medium and long term.
Thanks very much. And I think if these early consultations are anything to go by, there's a lot of interest in the development of this. And to your point, Nico, that, you know, it's a collaborative effort. So clearly there's a lot of interest in being involved with the NRRA in this. Unfortunately, that's all we really have time for today with regard to the Q&A. So I would again like to thank you, Nico and Viv, for making time to speak with us today. I think it's been a great conversation starter. So I'd like to thank everyone online on behalf of AIDR and NRRA for participating, for asking questions. When you exit today's Zoom, you'll be asked to complete a short survey. Today's post-event survey contains several questions where you will have an opportunity to contribute your feedback to help with the development of the National Action Plan. So I strongly encourage you to take part. It will come to you almost instantly after you close out of this. So if you could just take a few moments of your time and complete the survey, and at least then start that conversation and have your say about the development of the plan. It's been a pleasure to host you this afternoon. Until next time, stay safe everyone, and farewell.